Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and as always, I'm joined by my good buddies Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
Guys, be cool, but I think somebody's listening. Do you think somebody's listening?
No, our podcast nobody's listening.
No.
Thank you.
Our downloads have proven nobody's listening. Well, that is a conspiracy I have, that we've somehow been shadow banned from the podverse. And conspiracies are something that we've touched on a few times in the 6 years we've been doing the Mount Rushmore podcast. For those of you who were down with us at episode 31, I guess we talked about hoaxes. So we were kind of flirting around the topic of conspiracies. And then episode 51, we actually tackled it forthright and admitted that we do get suckered in, because it was episode 51 was conspiracy theories that we kind of believe. But we have been lately inspired to tackle the topic again with the Mount Rushmore, and this is this episode's topic, the Mount Rushmore of the craziest conspiracy theories. But we're bringing in somewhat of an expert and a person who has a very thriving and exciting and incredibly immaculately produced podcast. And that person would be Fearful Jesuit of the Paranoid Strain. Fearful, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're very grateful for you to come on the podcast. We would love for our listeners to find out right away what your podcast is about and where they can find it.
Oh, well, thanks so much. It's called The Paranoid Strain. It is on all of the regular podcast things. The way you can recognize it is my logo is a terrified eyeball staring through the blinds at whatever is scaring conspiracy theorists. I've been doing the show for about 5 years. The first several years I was doing one show every 2 months, and they would range in length from like an hour to 3.5 hours. The longest being about like JFK or the concept of reality. But I have in the past couple of years broken them down to half-hour-ish chunks every 2 weeks. But I designed them so that they all tell one long story. So, for example, last year, I ended up with a 12.5-hour epic about the history of secret societies that I'm real proud of. Right now, I am in a production hiatus for like 6 or 7 weeks, which is what I do every time I start gearing up for a new thing. And I'm doing a new series that I'm calling QAnon: How We Got Here. Which I'm going to try and trace all of the threads that led to QAnon, or that QAnon has absorbed, or that QAnon is inspiring. And I'm going to talk about that until I get sick of it. And so that'll probably be another year or so of content. But right now, for example, I'm interviewing a friend who happens to be an expert on the Federal Reserve, which has all kinds of conspiracies about it. But he can also tell you that there's all sorts of stuff that people are ignoring that actually is stuff that legitimately, with evidence, is like problems with the culture or the way that the Federal Reserve thinks of itself or communicates with the public. And so I'm trying to sort of draw the distinction between the threads of insanity that people yell about these things and what actually happens. So whenever I use the tagline for the show, it's the show that explains conspiracy theories to normal people. I am not interested in convincing the convinced that conspiracy theories are. If they're convinced conspiracy theories are true, I'm not talking about it. I'm just explaining to other people why all this weird stuff keeps going on around them.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. One thing I think is interesting is the psychology, and so in your explaining, perhaps you have an insight into the mindset of a person who has embraced a conspiracy theory. And I imagine there are a number of different profiles, but is that something that you can give us primer on, the why?
Well, I don't know that there's a single psychological profile, and it kind of depends on how deep into this stuff people get. I actually had the opportunity to interview a listener who had just sort of gotten himself out of a QAnon belief cycle that he got into because he was genuinely concerned about like the trafficking of kids. So he, people just sort of preyed on his natural, very respectable and honorable wish to try and help underprivileged people who were being, preyed upon. And then they got him into this belief set that is just completely insane. I will say that I've learned that over the course of the years, I've learned several things that really surprised me. One of which is that a lot of people who believe conspiracy theories are not dumb, but rather really, really intelligent, because once you start believing something, if you're really smart, you can build a lot more defenses around your irrational beliefs so that you can't as easily be talked out of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I mean, it's not universally true. Some people just believe anything they hear that sounds weird, but there are a lot of folks who have really elaborate defenses that they have built up. I mean, when you're believing something that's completely cuckoo bananas, you almost have to if you're going to look at yourself in the mirror. And then their different conspiracies are different, right? So we're going to talk about some of the craziest, but there are some that are simply not particularly crazy. For example, I did 3.5 hours on JFK. This is because I think that the overwhelming evidence says that Oswald shot JFK with 3 bullets from the book depository, end of story. However, it is eminently reasonable for people to believe a different story about that. It is not eminently reasonable for people to believe the earth is flat. Those are 2 completely different scenarios. And basically everything kind of falls into one of those areas. So a person can be totally psychologically normal and believe JFK conspiracy theories. The flat earth, maybe that's less likely to be true.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
there's not one.
It's a broad swath when you're talking about conspiracy theories. It's a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let's if we have any more insight as we discuss our individual choices, maybe we can kind of use that as a color commentary. But Fearful, we are privileged to have you on the show, and guests always go first. So what is your first choice for craziest conspiracy theories?
Okay, so I'm trying to do this in ascending order. So I guess this one would be the Teddy Roosevelt of this Rushmore. And I'm kind of cheating because it's a very specific sort of conspiracy theory, but it's called Veilus. And I'm going to try and give you the brief version. You ever heard of Philip K. Dick?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was super brilliant and also suffered from various episodes throughout his life, maybe having to do with drug use, maybe having to do with mental illness. But there was this event that happened between February and March of 1974 that he basically wrote and thought and was just obsessed with for the rest of his life, which I believe he died in 82. So he believed that his brain was pierced by a pink light from an extraterrestrial satellite orbiting outside of, I think it was outside of the moon, but I'm not positive, that fed him information about the fact that the world as he experienced it was not real. And that in fact, if he and everyone around him was experiencing time in what he called orthogonal time. So it was like time at a right angle to the real flow of time. And if you could see the real time around you, you would realize that we were all actually in the 4th century, the 4th Christian century, under the heel of the Roman Empire, which had never fallen, and that everything that we see around us is not true. Now, the reason I love this so much is not only because he wrote several really good books about it, including one bona fide classic called Veilus, but also because he interrogated this deeply held belief that he had experienced and he could not deny. He interrogated it and doubted himself to the point that he wrote thousands of pages of ruminations on this topic, which you can actually buy the distilled version of. It's called The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick. And so I actually did a 3.5-hour show separately on Philip K. Dick and Christian Gnosticism and like the way that he looked at the world, because I think it has a lot to say to all of us, whether we believe in his particular pink light fascination or not. But so that is the least crazy of the 4 craziest, but it's also super interesting to me because I think that it is also like a unique effort by a truly honest intellectual person to examine his own beliefs while also being unable to not believe them.
Wow. So
Yeah, that's a
when you
lot
say
to take in.
examine, he's trying to debunk his own beliefs. Is that what you're saying?
Sometimes he was. Sometimes he believed it was absolutely true. Sometimes he thought that there was a completely different reason for it, like the Soviets were testing something by implanting visions in the heads of artists using like either telepaths or some sort of other. Like he went through every possible permutation of what this could be because he could not deny the reality of it. I mean, there's all kinds of elements of this. Like I said, it went on for a couple of months. It was triggered by this young woman wearing a Jesus fish pendant, dropping off some medicine for his son. And then like a couple of days after that, he had an experience of just visually seeing just thousands of abstract art pictures of like the quality of a Kandinsky, just one after the other, thousands and thousands of them, which he believed was maybe a way that information was being transmitted to his brain more efficiently than words. Like this is one of those things that if you happen to be me is just catnip. Like I am so fascinated by people whose brains work differently than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of really one of the main reasons that I've done the show. But yeah, so I recommend Bayless and Philip K. Dick to anyone who's interested in that kind of thing.
Wowzers. I'm familiar with his novels, which, reading them after seeing the films were more obtuse than the films, obviously. Like,
Yep.
if Hollywood had a challenge adapting any of Dick's work, this might be the pinnacle of them. I want to make sure that nobody thinks that I'm not characterizing the experiences that Dick had as induced by anything other than intellectual fervor, but we're not laughing at anybody with a mental illness or
no. I'm definitely not either. I deeply respect this intellectual journey that he went on, whatever the cause of it was. Like I genuinely love this stuff.
Yeah, and the vigor with which one would also one thing that I think characterizes some pseudoscience and conspiracy theories is there's a desire to actually believe them, and then the reasoning, the folks that did their independent research to determine that the COVID. There are people who already. I think it's. I don't know if it's. I think it's inductive, in which you already have your presumption, and you're looking for evidence to support that, so that you do not have to change your opinion. So, but it sounds like Dick was definitely trying to examine the truth or what was really happening there.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy.
Wow. Okay, Richard and Michael, top that, losers.
I'll go first. Richard went first last time, but I'll start off with one which I consider like a more fun one of our choices. But flat earthers.
Oh, right.
Seem to exist on this very special plane, pardon the pun, of believing something that is so easily proved wrong, their belief, but are so dug in that it's just unbelievable to that they go through this entire process of describing something that you can see and I can explain to my almost 5-year-old and he can understand. And I think that's what always gets to me, is it's always like, but my kid can understand this. And how do we ever get to the point where I think what it comes down to is that it's not just that the earth is flat, is that somebody is benefiting by the earth being round and the concept of the earth being round, which gets into the conspiracy of it in part, right? And like, obviously, Fearful, you've done a lot more research than I have. I just find it, mildly amusing, but that NASA is a sham to make money somehow, that all these, the government is propagating the earth being round to make money. Like, all of it there seems to be a devilishness behind the earth being round that I don't really quite know
who's benefiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big sphere. Big
Yeah.
spheres.
Well, spoiler alert. That is actually my number one. That is the craziest conspiracy theory.
Oh,
Like
okay.
in
Great.
my
We're okay to
whatever
double
kind of
up. That's
expert
cool.
opinion, I think flat Earth, you have to deny everything that we know about essentially everything to believe flat Earth. It is just by definition. You have to be willing, not only, I mean, Michael, you nailed it on the head. They are insistent that somebody's making money. They are 100% certain that someone is. Now, sometimes it's extreme biblical literalists who go beyond denying evolution and point out that there are certain Bible verses, especially in the Old Testament, where it is very clear that the Bible is laying out that the earth has 4 actual physical corners, that it is encased in a dome. When they say the firmament in the story of Noah and all that, they mean the firmament is the sky, but the sky is actually a dome, like it is like a glass dome, and the water came from the firmament and from the deep. So like the water as they understood it, there's water up there. Like it is, we are in a snow globe for all intents and purposes. This is so obviously not true. Like you can't even figure out how to talk to a person about how wrong they are.
Yeah.
And so that just has to take the cake as far as I'm concerned. Like you're right. They are. And then the other problem is that, and by the way, I did 2 hours on this, so you can look through the RSS feed. There's a lot of really good books on this and various stuff. But one of the other things is there's a huge problem in trying to figure out who's sincere in flat Earth and who isn't, because there is a lot of trolling. Like some of the major flat Earth organizations from its heyday a few years ago were definitely trolls. But then there are other people who 1 billion% believe this, and it's mind blowing.
Wow.
It's almost like I think of some like the kind of more, like you said, the trolling aspect of conspiracies. Like I first thought of how ridiculous just the trolling was on like the flying spaghetti monster, and how that grew into like this kind of faux religion back in the day that was just there to kind of mock kind of very overly religious people. And then my wife pointed out something recently, birds aren't real, which I had not heard of in any way. I was like, what are you talking? And I was like, I have to, what do you mean? She's like, oh yeah, look up birds are fake. And I was like, what is this? And I had to look it up, and it's just this ridiculous trolling person and community that's grown out of it, that's built on this other idea that birds aren't real. They're all drones, or there's someone's watching us.
It's genius. It's so good. Like there may be that birds used to exist and they were replaced, or maybe birds never existed and they were always fake by the government. So
Yeah, and what I appreciate about the birds aren't real performance art hoax, let's call it whatever you want to call it, is that now that the conspiracy theorists have actually taken on birds aren't real as a conspiracy theory, not that birds aren't real, but they claim that birds aren't real is actually a CIA covert ops program designed to discredit conspiracy theories.
Well, don't worry, they will. Go ahead.
I was going to say, they've taken the Andy Kaufman bit and created their own conspiracy theory around it. It's just fascinating to me.
It will, that conspiracy theories will swallow whatever you put in front of them and absorb it and turn it into something they can use. By the way, I do expect that at some point they will be blaming the birds conspiracy on. They've started with the CIA, but it will eventually go to one of the following 3 groups. This is Fearful Jesuits. I can't remember what I called it, but it's like maxim of universal conspiracy constants. Inevitably, the person to blame, the group to blame behind every single conspiracy at some point is either the Jews, the Illuminati / the Freemasons, or the space aliens, or some combination of those 3. Every single one of them, every time. Once it gets crazy enough, they're going to blame one of those 3 groups.
I love that. That's your Jimmy the Greek style prediction for.
Oh yeah, no, it's just there is no question. Every one of them, as it gets crazier, devolves into thinking one of those groups is behind it.
Okay, so I in another role that I have as a freelance video editor took money from flat earthers to do this very short video.
I love
a
it.
very
Jeff,
short
Jeff
news
Gass.
bulletin to promote a gathering of the Flat Earth Society, North Carolina, or something like that. And one thing that I noticed in the photo that was provided by this organization, I did not say the Earth is flat, but I said these idiots are meeting up is basically what I said. One thing I noticed in the photo they sent me was some very fringe-looking persons, people in what looked like kind of like hand-me-down survivalist gear. At the kind of the crux were these very kind of men, and their wives and kids around them, kind of like looking a little bit almost like apologetic, like, I'd leave this idiot, but we've got 3 kids together and I don't know what to do.
Yep.
And a community around them in which maybe they don't support or believe entirely what they say, but in some cases, what harm are they doing? This is just something that they like to do when they drink on weekends, is talk about how the Earth is flat. And
well, yeah, that's also something that I agree with. I've referred to flat Earth as a conspiracy theory that I'm actually kind of I have a certain love for, like chemtrails, because they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
That there is the one guy who flew in a rocket and eventually died because he kept trying to create new rockets. But apparently that guy was trying to create rockets before he joined in with the Flat Earth Society.
Oh.
So he was kind of going to do that to himself at some point. And then somebody shot somebody else with a crossbow in Australia in an argument about flat Earth. But other than that, the body, and I don't think they died. So as near as I can tell, the body count is 1 death by inadvertent suicide, and 0 other people have died from flat Earth, which unfortunately you can't say about anti-vax or QAnon.
But what about all the people who took a boat and went off the side of the Earth? They all died. That's a lot of deaths right there.
Underreported. That's a tragedy.
Well, okay. Does this mean that now Richard and Michael, since we have now heard Fearful's first and final choice, then Richard and Michael, do you want to go with your second choice?
Yeah, we can do
Okay.
it. We can do that.
Okay.
And Fearful mentioned it. It's mentioned the JFK assassination.
Okay.
And I do completely agree with him that in the crux of it, that maybe it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. Maybe there were some outside forces who were involved. Is something where if it's not probable or likely, there's at least a grain of plausibility in there that allows people to kind of grab onto it. That being said, there are some batshit crazy JFK conspiracy theories out there that go well beyond it was the mob or it was Cubans or it was the Soviets. My favorite one is a guy named Milton William Cooper, who was known for spreading the word about a Project Luna, which is the secret alien base that's on the dark side of the moon.
Oh.
Which we all know about that.
Yeah.
And then later on, he promoted the idea that JFK was assassinated because he was about to expose Project Luna and all of the collusion that had been taking place between Washington and aliens. And that there was some sort of gas pressure device that aliens had given to the driver of the limo that was used to off him, basically. That's my favorite of all the really out there JFK assassination theories. And the JFK assassination world is this broad umbrella. It can take in people who have a very, have degrees in history and physics, who are really looking at it from a very scientific and well thought out perspective. And it can bring in people who think that aliens must have killed JFK. There is this incredibly broad range of people who are interested in the JFK assassination and believe that something isn't right about it. And I'm fascinated with the idea that this can go from people whose thought process tends to go towards things that are provable and plausible to some extent, to people who clearly believe things that are just outside of the realm of plausibility.
Do you so one thing that I guess this is an observation. I don't know what I have to support it, is that I feel like there is an audience for conspiracy that is found in persons who feel outside of that are outside of the stream of mainstream information. So if you might meet a person who doesn't have a traditional education, maybe they don't have they exist outside of a certain channel of mainstream information or above it, in the case of, say, celebrities. So how many celebrities do we know who have maybe a large amount of wealth, a large amount of influence, and they somehow have kind of even risen above the facts that we get as plebeians? They almost so that's one thing I find is very interesting. You can't necessarily blame persons who maybe they didn't have the access to, or didn't have the desire to consume the kind of science education that I might have had, or you might have had in school. But Gwyneth Paltrow can think whatever the hell she wants to, but maybe that's an unfair characterization.
Yep. So I'm trying to make sure that I don't monopolize this conversation, because I literally can talk about all of these things for like a dozen hours, as I have proven over and over by doing that on my show. Yeah. But so number one, I think you're absolutely right, Jeff, that autodidacts are among the most difficult. First of all, they are among the best conspiracy theorists in terms of developing them. Like the folks who have taught themselves they tend to be very intelligent, and they've also had to learn things on their own and try things out. And so they are very good at creating and then defending their theories. So I think you're 100% right there. And Richard, I can't believe you brought up Milton William Cooper, because okay, slight sidetrack. My band that does all the songs for the show, it's all original music also. It's but so we usually have a song per episode, at least. We did a 2.5-hour rock opera over the Christmas break on the top. That's actually true. On the topic, it's fully like narrated and produced in a studio. And on the subject of the January 6th Capitol riots, as related to the show. So it all fits in with the show's ridiculous cosmology and like the nonsense. But there's quite a sort of number of characters that have developed with the show over the years. But so we are planning next year to do a similar project that is entirely centered around William Cooper. And the Jfk assassination theory that he has is one of my favorite things that he ever talked about, because he was trying to convince people that if you watch the Zapruder film right, you can see the driver of JFK's limo shooting him somehow.
What?
Right.
While driving. That if you properly watch it, you can really see this, and it's obvious.
Well, if I could eat a Big Mac in my car with one hand,
right,
it's basically the same thing as shooting the president.
It's almost identical.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you'll give us a link to where we could share out where you to publish on, I don't know, SoundCloud or Spotify.
We do have it on SoundCloud, but it's just the songs. But you can get the whole album in my RSS feed. Like it's just 2 episodes of the show next to each other.
Great.
9116 parts 1 and 2, and it's like I didn't write most of the songs. It's the band leader for the band, but if you listen through to the show, like the last episode of the show, I think there were like 12 original songs in the soundtrack by the time we got finished. Like, wow. It's
nice.
If you can overdo something, I overdo it. Like that's pretty much my approach.
Well, we overdid our first half with a lot of great chat. So I'm going to do our intermission, and that is when we implore listeners to go out on our social handles, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and follow, like, poke, thumb up, or whatever the current thing you do is. And then do us a solid. We've been doing this podcast for 6 years, and we always are inspired by suggestions that listeners give us. So if you have a topic suggestion, it could even be something like the topic we have this week, which is a derivation of an original topic in which maybe you think we didn't quite cover it thoroughly. So yeah, let us know what you want us to talk about. Previous suggestors of topics have ended up being guests on our podcast. It's not mandatory, but it's possible. And at this point, I want us to check in again and ask Fearful to plug their podcast again.
Okay, sure. I mean, I guess maybe I'll plug those two, that sort of two-part album. It's called 9116. Again, I'm not responsible for that title, but it's basically connecting 9/11 and 16, and also doing an homage to Rush. Yeah. Also, I should mention that I have a dedicated artist for the show who does a different illustration for literally every single episode. So he did full album covers and liner notes, and there's all the lyrics actually appear on the fake record albums that we have linked from the show notes. Like it truly is a ridiculous production. So anyway, I'd love for everybody to listen to that, and you just scroll down a little bit and you'll find it in the feed. It was January 6th when we released, or yeah, I think it was January 6th because we were trying to do the anniversary, but 9116, it's different than the rest of the show, but it's got a lot of the flavor of the show.
Right on. Cool. So thank you for plugging that. And we can, I think, link in the show notes or the episode to all those things. So let's jump into Fearful's third choice for craziest conspiracy theories.
Okay. This is, I mean, if we're going from craziest, this is my second, and it's really tough because the third craziest and the second craziest, I normally call this one the second craziest conspiracy theory that exists, and it's QAnon. So as you'll note from what I was saying earlier in the episode, I am spending a year-ish talking about QAnon because I think it's incredibly important, and I think it is eating other conspiracy theories. So what I mean when I say that is, for example, after the January 6th riot, when nothing that Q had promised was going to happen. By the way, sorry, does I don't know if your audience knows what QAnon is. QAnon is a series of posts on some of the internet's least palatable message boards that have insisted that they are by a person with secret Energy Department Q clearance that has maintained that Donald Trump is actually trying to fight against an international child sex trafficking ring, which almost all Democrats, a bunch of prominent Republicans, like the Queen of England, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, and a bunch of other celebrities are involved in, where they either molest children or like terrify them so that they can drink their adrenochrome to stay young. So anyway, it's totally sane. And that this is a real thing, and it is huge, and it is growing. And if you look at any Donald Trump rallies, you will see QAnon and "Where we go one, where we go all," which is their slogan, even though it makes absolutely no sense. Like you'll just see a ton of this stuff involved, and QAnon just keeps mutating as nothing that Q says comes true year after year after year. So Hillary Clinton was supposed to be arrested back in 2017. Still waiting on that one. That none of these things have happened. So what they have started doing is adapting other conspiracy theories into their conspiracy theories. So for example, they started insisting after January 6th, 2021, that Donald Trump was going to be reinstated on March 4th, 2021. Not sure why that was the date, but that he was going to become the 19th president of the United States. Now, you might be confused because he had been the 45th president of the United States, but that's because they had grabbed onto this sovereign citizen nonsense that says that since Ulysses S. Grant, the government of the United States has actually been an illegally constituted corporation that sells our labor to international bankers. By the way, that's where the Jews come in. It always comes to the Jews, the Illuminati, or the aliens. I'm telling you. So that's always the code that they want to use to just misrepresent Jewish people. So they started adapting this, which, because Trump will destroy this false corporate version of the United States, he will then become the 19th president of the United States, because we haven't had an actual president since Grant.
Wow.
So that's why I think they're super crazy.
Yeah.
Fearful, listening to you describe QAnon is like reading the first draft of the Star Wars by George Lucas, where like you read through it and none of it makes sense. And there's like an inkling of like sense in there, but that was amazing.
Well, yeah, it's what I deal with all the time for some reason. So
this is actually how, evolution works, right?
Right.
Things need to adapt and mutate. And do you think there's something about storytelling in which, when like the, I forget, what do you call it with those preachers who say the apocalypse is going to be on a certain day, or doomsday is going to happen on a certain day, and then that day goes by and they find some reason why it wasn't that day at all. It was another day. But it seems like what QAnon is doing is finding compelling stories that exist in the crazy pants mindset, and then latching onto those, kind of piggybacking on those, maybe like Madonna throughout the 80s and 90s, like finding a new identity when the one she was using aged out. So in a way, it's kind of dealing with the power of mythology and story.
Oh, it 100% is. And once again, I could spend 6 hours answering the thing you just said. I will very briefly say that you're absolutely correct that it is an evolutionary meme, right? It's a meme that is evolving in order to stay relevant, because otherwise they die, right? So it's like any other evolving thing, but it's actually even better because they are not just passively waiting to absorb other things. They are actively creating new nonsense realities from anything that comes up. They accused Wayfair of selling industrial grade furniture that's specially made for like science labs and stuff that cost like $15,000. And because they had like human names associated with them, they were accusing them of actually shipping children to pederasts throughout the world, because nobody would order a cabinet that cost $15,000 that was named like Laura or whatever. And they started trying to match them up to missing children reports. And like one of the supposedly missing children, who was real irate about it, got on TikTok and was like, "I'm not fucking missing. Like, what are you talking about?" Like, just started screaming at these people, like, who do you think you are? So yeah, it's fantastic. And the other thing I'll say is that there's a great book called The Storytellers Paradox by Jonathan Gotshal that I just read for the current episodes that I'm doing, that is specifically about the problem. He's a guy who just studies stories and their importance. And he wrote a book about how stories are our best empathy vehicle and how great they are. So this one's about how bad storytelling is and how it leads to it is a two-way sword, right?
Yeah.
QAnon is an extremely compelling story. It's insane, but it is extremely compelling. And so that, if people believe good storytellers, and so the problem is when they can get them to completely disconnect from reality.
Wow. Okay, this is so much to drink in. Richard and Michael, what do you got?
Our third choice is, we touched upon it earlier. It's the 9/11 truthers conspiracy that, well, I don't know which one you want to choose. There's like, a handful of them, but basically that 9/11 was an inside job, that there was explosive planted within the World Trade Center to bring it down, that the crashing of the planes into the World Trade Center couldn't actually, weaken the building, that something else, that the government was involved. They knew that this was happening. All of this stuff is just built into just this kind of, it's a very American story about paranoia and the government and the CIA all working against our people, because they have other interests that they need to distract from, or a reason for sowing doubt within another country so that we can attack them, giving ourselves, kind of leeway to pursue our interests around the world. But it's just one of those things where it's like, man, I think what it is I'm always really disappointed when I find one of our friends kind of dabbles in it and believes in it, that you'll see like a little bit too much of a person liking something on Facebook, and then you're just like, oh no, not you.
Oh yeah.
And I think specifically with like 9/11 trutherism, it seems like you did see a giant plane crash into the building, right? Like that could have, it doesn't seem that inconceivable that not only one plane, but two planes hit these buildings and like it knocked them down. Like those little things that like stand out, that I think is like the infallible, or the just the sadness of seeing someone go down that rabbit hole, and that there's something in them that leads them to believe this thing that doesn't seem at all possible.
You know what? It occurs to me that I felt the same trauma that others did when they saw this thing that is at its core unbelievable. So seeing the footage on that day was like watching a apocalyptic, tragic film, the likes of Dante's Peak, or there were the volcano movies and the hurricane movies and the typhoon movies and all those things. And there's a sense of trauma that you have. And I remember feeling, I've heard some people explain belief in certain pseudosciences as almost like a reaction to trauma, or you're almost in shock. So from something that happened, so you say it must have been a UFO or something like that. But I understand exactly what you're talking about, though, because I know that I'm due back in reality after going through that trauma. But I think others find a lot of comfort in those stories that help create maybe some justification that almost matches the type of disbelief that they had when they first witnessed that horrific vision that was. But yeah.
So you will be unsurprised to know that A, I did 2 episodes on this, and B, I have some very decided opinions. So
we're grateful for those opinions. We're grateful.
Well, so I first of all saw one of the World Trade Centers fall with my own eyes from Herald Square in New York, because I was working at Rockefeller Center and had just walked down 57 flights of stairs and was walking south toward my apartment when literally the skyscraper collapsed in front of me. Like it was the second one. You couldn't see, like the first one had already collapsed, but there was so much smoke that I couldn't see that it had actually collapsed. And there were people talking about it having collapsed, but I hadn't seen it. So I didn't really believe it, because I'm kind of a have to see it to believe it guy. But then I literally saw the second one like fall from where I was standing. So so I take the 9/11 thing pretty seriously. I actually introduced the first of those episodes with a sort of audio pastiche of me and all of my friends, and like what we actually did that day, and what our experience was like trying to get back to safety. I had one friend who very, very nearly died. He was right down on Wall Street, and was huge chunks of masonry were hitting the ground right around him. So he barely made it. But then the other thing is, when I went to do those shows, my oldest closest friend is a sort of very mild 9/11 truther. He's also almost just argumentatively a "we didn't go to the moon" guy. He more just thinks that one's fun. But so I organized the 9/11 episode around trying to explain to him why his doubts about what had happened don't really add up to a coherent story. And so I interviewed him, and then I did the whole show, and then I showed him what I had learned, and then I interviewed him again, and we talked about it. And so I thought that was a really solid way to handle that. I do recommend that episode, though I was much worse at audio production at that point. So there's some real spikes in the audio that I feel bad about. And if I ever had time, I would go back and fix. But But anyway, so yes, 9/11 truth is, it was a very weird phenomenon. And interestingly, in my research, I learned that it peaked during the 2004 election to 2006. And actually when Bush's party lost seats, it tended to sort of, it faded in terms of importance, because people at least felt like somebody was pushing back against the Bush administration, which, so this was to some extent channeling political angst about the Bush administration at the time, which is interesting because most of our contemporary conspiracy theories come from the right, but 9/11 truth was largely a conspiracy theory of the left. So
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and not entirely. There are plenty of people who are 9/11 truthers who are also QAnon now, but like the original reporting was by a French reporter named Thierry Melançon, I believe, who wrote a book that got translated like a year later and started to really hit in the United States around like 2003. And then from there, domestic lunatics took it and it made it really super crazy, where you had like the planes were holograms, and there's some real choice audio that I clipped from various weird YouTube videos and strewed throughout the episode. But yeah, that one's a real personal one, because if you were there, it's kind of hey, fuck you, it's really
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, let's keep plowing forward. Fearful, what is your final choice? And I realize it's not, we've heard your final one,
right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
This is the second craziest, just because Flat Earth actually denies all of physics. That's the only reason. And this is the only one that I haven't done the full research on, because I'm waiting until I do the UFOs year. But it's David Icke and his lizard people run the world, interdimensional lizard people run the world conspiracy theory is so deliciously crazy. I can't wait to tear off big chunks of it. He's another one who dances around very closely with anti-Semitism. It's just rife in a lot of these stories. But he is also, he's one of those people who will latch on to things like the Illuminati or whatever else, but then his explanation is, but actually the Illuminati are transdimensional lizard people. And again, if people aren't familiar with this, lizard people run the world, and they're all of the major political figures and celebrities and everything else. And you can see their lizard eyes at certain points if the camera catches them in the correct way. And they either feed on human fear or something. I haven't done all the research on this one, so I'm not quite as well versed as I would be. But just on its face, it is. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. I love it so much. I don't know why I'm like this, but I really, really love it because it's so dumb.
Wow. Okay. When did this originate? Do you know?
So,
what's the vintage of this?
I think so. David Icke is I think, again, I'm really on shaky ground here because I've held this one off, but I believe he's a former British soccer player who has just become famous by promulgating this one big idea, which is like the global elites are trying to screw you over, which, yeah, maybe so, but those global elites are lizards. Okay, you kind of lose me there. Mm-hmm. And this has just been his claim to fame. He's written god-awful numbers of books about this. He appears in all kinds of other conspiracy theorists' conspiracies. Like he is the guy who is the lizard people guy. Like that's his métier, and he gives speeches all around the world to other people who have very low standards for evidence.
Wow. Okay. All right. Okay. I like you going out on that one. So I appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Richard and Michael, so Fearful did not live up to his name. He had zero fear of you.
As he should.
Yeah. He knew he was going to, I think, do a 360 high flying slam dunk on you idiots as soon as
I just spend all of my time doing this. Like if I weren't up to this, then that would be really embarrassing.
Yeah. He might be fearful of things, but it ain't Richard and Michael from the Mount Rushmore. So, but gentlemen, what is your last attempt?
All right, so our last failed attempt Our best failed attempt that we is the Paula's dead rumors.
Oh, wow, fun. Okay,
love it.
That circulated around the Beatles about 1969, right around the time the Beatles were breaking up, where these rumors started popping up on local radio stations and student newspapers and elsewhere that Paul McCartney had actually been killed back in I think it's supposed to be 1966, November 9th.
You could be right. Yeah.
That there was a car accident and Paul had been decapitated. And in order to keep the band going and to save the general public from the overwhelming grief that this news would cause, they decided to hire a sound-alike and a look-alike to fill in for Paul McCartney. That's also one of the reasons why, hey, that's why the Beatles stopped touring, because you couldn't have a fake Paul up there trying to play an instrument and sing. But if you had it in the studio, you could bring in one guy to be the voice and another guy to be the look of Paul McCartney. And this actually got to the point where like a reporter from Life magazine was sent out to interview Paul McCartney about this theory. Like, this was a cover story on Life magazine. The headline is "The Case of the Missing Beatle. Paul is Still With Us." This was believed enough that mainstream news actually reported on it, like with this very serious, like, maybe Paul McCartney is dead.
Let's talk to Paul to find out.
Yeah. Let's talk to Paul McCartney. Are you dead? Well, no, I'm not.
No. Case closed.
Nobody could do that particular head wave except Paul. So the other thing is, I've been promising my band leader, that I'm going to do an all music conspiracy theories episode soon, because he wrote a song for it like 3 years ago that's been sitting in the can, and I really need to use it because it's great. But yeah, I love the Paul is dead theory. I also love the theory that Stephen King was actually Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon, because they do look weirdly similar. There's also a theory that Alex Jones is actually the deceased comedian Bill Hicks, because again, they look kind of similar. But my favorite Beatles conspiracy theory that I'm going to be talking about is the theory that Theodore Adorno of the Frankfurt School of Philosophers actually wrote and recorded all of the Beatles songs as an attempt to destroy American culture, even though he avowedly hated pop music and had absolutely nothing to do with this. But like, right-wingers believe that like it was a communist, like a socialist plot to create music that would hypnotize and make the youth easily brainwashed. So that's my
even Octopus's Garden
theory. Yeah, even Octopus's Garden. This like weird, bitter German philosopher is just pounding out, obla di obla da for some reason. Is where they got this, I have absolutely no idea. I'm real eager to follow it up. There's also some fun ones like Stevie Wonder can see-ism.
And that was actually
fantastic.
That one was actually in our conspiracy theories we kind of believe.
Yeah, I know. That's a weird bit of video, right? Like the man just like reaches out and catches something in midair, right?
The proof is out there. That's one that I just do your own research.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have some nostalgia for Paul is Dead, because that was the first conspiracy theory that I think I was taken by as a young Beatles fan, to the point where I was ruining turntables, playing songs backwards and forwards, and
oh, that's great.
Trying to convince my friends, turn up this part of A Day in the Life, and this is where a car crashes or something like that, and pointing at Abbey Road and trying to find Paul is out of step and he's barefoot and this and this and this and this and this. But it was what I find interesting is that Gary Lewis of Gary Lewis and the Playboys was dead for years before anybody knew. No, I'm just kidding. There's always something that is the kernel of there's some kind of compelling component to it. And was there something with the Paul is Dead?
Yeah, I don't know that one yet because I haven't started doing the research. I don't know how it exactly started, but it really just sprung up like wildfire. Like as Richard was saying, it became huge news very quickly.
Yeah. Were they like the Stones? I know they were Paul was busted for marijuana, but I think that was after the Beatles.
Yeah, that was after.
That was in Japan later.
Yeah, that was solo.
Yeah, I think what I find fascinating about these stories is it always seems like there's some kind of like Fearful pointed out, some kind of story element that may have hopped from one thing to another and kind of landed in that story. I do believe that one of the major reasons for Beatlemania's popularity is the zeitgeist, the mindset after the JFK assassination, and how
Absolutely.
this mania might not have been, of course, it was global. It wasn't relegated just to the US, but this mania might not have impacted the culture so much had we not wanted something to heal with. So transferring that tragedy onto another figurehead might have been part of it, but who knows? Yeah,
it's also I think of the Beatles as one of the great miracles of 20th century history, like just the sheer amount of talent and like exactly the right people at exactly the right time. But you think about it, even and I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying about like a sort of release from the horror of JFK with them appearing just like 4 months later on American TV for the first time. But you think about, like, what are the odds that the band that would capture that kind of zeitgeist would also prove to be some of the greatest musical artists that you could have? How do both halves of that happen? Like, that is a truly remarkable scenario. I'm obsessed with the Beatles also. So yeah, so I'm right there with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fearful, for coming on our show.
Really, my pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun, and you've given us such great interest in going on and hearing more from your podcast, knowing that it's not just a typical couple of dudes rambling on like we do on our podcast, but there's excellent production values, and not just a commentary, but music. There's so much to look forward to our listeners. But you promo it best. Let folks know the title again and where they can find it.
Thank you guys so much. This has really been a blast. I look forward to digging through your archives as well. It is called The Paranoid Strain. It comes out every 2 weeks, and it's available where all podcasts are available. Just look for this very distinct paranoid, like worried eye looking through blinds. And that you'll find us there.
Awesome. Okay, so it's time to do some scoring. I know Richard and Michael were optimistic that they'd give you a run for your money, but
Richard, he's the government's got to him again.
Yeah, they did big scoring. Got to him.
He's been paid off by big conspiracy podcasts, and.
But I will say you'll get one, because Paul is Dead was something that was kind of a mind blower for me as a young person. So y'all get that. But the rest is going to go to our guest, Fearful. And because I'd never heard of it, and I'm a big fan of Philip K. Dick, maybe not big enough, I guess. Valus, the Philip K. Dick conspiracy theory. What's again the book of that, the exigency
so the exegesis is just his writings on these events. It's edited by, among others, Jonathan Lethem. I mean, if you're a Philip K. Dick like that psychotic, then it's really, really good reading. But if you want to read his books that are centered around that, it's basically Valus, the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, the Divine Invasion. I think those are the main ones that have directly to do with that. And then if you are interested, I can offer, I had 2 different shows that I called the reality shows that were about trying to, if I think of my show as a defense of reality, then I needed to talk about how little we actually know about how to define reality. So there's one 3.5-hour episode that's like the entire history of philosophers and scientists trying to explain reality, along with a bunch of stuff like the Mandela effect and other topics. And then there's one whole episode that's Philip K. Dick and Christian Gnosticism and other similar sort of like narrative artists who've tried to take on like what it means, what reality means, what it means to be human, how we know what we know about anything. So,
wow, cool. So it seems like building upon and around the topic of just a conspiracy theory. So that's
exactly.
That's really cool.
I try to expand the genre a little bit.
Cool. So I don't know if I finished scoring, but let's go with interdimensional lizard people. And how about we split it with flat earthers? Because Michael and Richard.
That seems fair.
Shows that, yeah. And I don't want to say the other one because fuck those guys. Okay. So very grateful for your participation, Fearful Jesuit. This has been a blast. Michael and Richard are just weeping and they just got smacked down so hard. This has been the Mount Rushmore of crazy conspiracy theories. I'm always Jeff.
I am Dracon, the lizard. I did it again, guys.
Oh, no.
Sorry. I'm Richard.
Hi, Michael.